All right. Five, four, three, two, one.
Good afternoon. My name is Jim Eskin, and on behalf of Eskin Fundraising Training, it is my privilege to welcome you to our webinar 43. And this one is going to be on stronger boards and stronger impact. And I have someone who I think knows more on those two subjects than anyone else on the planet. Let me first apologize. This is like the NFL schedule at the beginning of the year. We had a reschedule. It snows about once every 40 years, and it happened last week. I don't know about Jason and Priscilla. We didn't have electricity, heat, and internet from Sunday night until Wednesday night. And so we had 7 blankets and the two of us and 2 cats. We all were trying to keep each other warm at 2 p.m., it would come back on the power and the internet. And at 2 p.m., it was on, and I told Brian, I think we got to go. And then I called him back at 2:45. It ain't here, and I'm cold again. So I want to thank everyone who has rearranged their schedule to join us today, and particularly our guest. I'm going to give him a fuller introduction, but Brian Saber, it truly is one of the masters in the profession of fundraising. And talking about masters, but Brian, if we say the word master, you know better than I. One name comes to mind, and that is the late Gerald Panis, or Jerry, as people like Brian can call him. And Brian had such a gift. We lost Jerry, it was it in June in 2018, around there?
Yes. I
I
think it was
think you
late.
had like
Yes.
5 days to run interviews with him. Can you tell us, and for context for the audience, Jerry wrote this book asking, I alone have purchased 100 copies
Wow.
to give to all my board of directors and
Mhm.
staff, et cetera. And that book has sold more copies than every other book about fundraising put together. But this is a very unfair question, Brian, but I'm good at asking unfair questions. What would you say was the single richest
Mhm.
fundraising lesson you learned from Gerald?
Oh, wow. I'd have to say that I'm paraphrasing, but no one ever listened themselves out of a gift.
Repeat that. Repeat that.
No one ever listened themselves out of a gift, meaning, the art of listening is as important as anything in fundraising. And the fundraising we're talking about, the developing relationships, cultivating people, and then hopefully soliciting them in person. Eventually, we'll do that again, or at least one on one. Listening.
Mm, mm.
And he
If you,
really had a gift for engaging people and remembering things about people and having a curiosity.
and if our audience takes nothing home except what you just shared there, that no one ever listened to themselves out of a gift, they've had a good day. Now, Brian just completed 2 books that, which I see kind of blend your two passions, and that's one is study of the art of the solicitation, and the next one is building high performing boards. But I jumped out of sequence before I wanted to go there. Brian is a self-proclaimed introvert.
Hmm.
And I think everybody talks about fundraisers of being glib and speakers and won't shut up. Can you tell us some of the advantages that introvert would have in fundraising?
Sure. Well, first, because she said, Jim, you're not a believer that I am. I
Yeah.
want to share. I could share legions of stories, but I will share one, and then I'll talk about it. And actually, I'm working on my third book. Not a lot of people know that yet. It's going to come out by next fall, and it is on this topic of being shy and introverted and being a fundraiser.
I
I'm
love it.
really
I
excited
love
about it.
it. I love
Yeah.
it.
So here's my story, and then I'll tell you the advantages. So 2 years back now, I was a featured speaker for the Life and Legacy program of the Grinspoon Foundation.
Yes.
Yes, and they had actually bought my first book for all the attendees. So I was, whatever. I was a big part of this conference. Well, the night before was a cocktail party, which I had to attend, and I don't generally attend any events because I find it very awkward. So I had gone to this event and I was standing by the wall texting one of my dear friends saying, I really wish I didn't have to be here. I don't really know a lot of people here. I'm not in my comfort zone, whatever. And a gentleman looked over, saw me by the wall, and said, just thinking I was just anyone, why are you standing there by yourself? Come chat with us. They were just a very friendly crowd. And I came into the crowd, and then he or someone else looked at me and said, Wait, aren't you the guy on the back of the book?
Oh, I love it.
And I was so embarrassed that here I am, I'm their featured speaker. They have my book, and I was too sort of shy to actually engage anyone and was standing there by myself. So and I'm embarrassed even telling that. I think I'm blushing at the moment. Luckily, I'm tanned, so maybe it doesn't show. Anyway, so I am introverted. And I can be very shy, and I have been my whole life, but I have learned how to deal with it. And like a lot of actors who are shy, when I get up and present, I'm in my comfort zone because it's the stuff that I'm expert about.
Do you think that's really you? Do you think you move into Brian Saber, Mr. Asking Styles or something?
What do you mean?
You know what I mean? That you become someone else.
Yes. Well, not exactly someone else, but I have figured out how to do it. I've figured out how to be social and interactive, and I mean that's probably the key to having been a successful fundraiser. So why do I think introverts can be good fundraisers? Well, introverts tend to listen more than talk. So it goes right back to what we said about Jerry, right? No one's ever listened themselves out of a gift. Um, we tend, for those of you who don't know the styles, I'm a kindred spirit, which is bottom right. You can't see, it's sort of behind that lady's head. I'm an intuitive introvert. So we tend to be very feelings oriented, very sensitive. Some would say oversensitive. We take a lot of things personally. But because of it, we tend to treat other people with attention and care. We tend to be sensitive to others because we want people to be sensitive to ourselves. And especially in the fundraising I'm talking about. So we talk about fundraising. I'm talking about this cultivation and solicitation of gifts one-on-one. I'm not talking about direct mail or special events or institutional support or crowdfunding or anything like that. It's where the big gifts are, where the board is involved and where the biggest gifts are for most institutions. And that's all based on relationship. In introverts are not, there's a difference between being an introvert and being hermetically sealed, right? And being someone who is a hermit, actually. We are social. It just has to do with deriving our energy and where we use it. I won't go into too much detail on that, but we do like being with people. We enjoy their company. We just need a lot more time to regroup and rebuild our energy. We use it. So we do well with people. And that's, I think, why that and the fact that we allow donors to talk more than extroverts naturally do, I think are keys to our success. And Jerry Panis was an introvert.
Hmm. I'm thinking too that most fundraisers, because they think that's what they should be, are extroverts. And I'm thinking now there's probably a lack of the introverts on the team.
Well, there's less respect, I think, for them. I was just rereading an interview I did with a fundraiser years ago who said she felt she didn't get the same respect. And I've heard that a number of times. If you're not, actually, I'm coaching an executive director of a nonprofit right now. And he's saying, my board wants me to be more of a rainmaker, which is that analytic extrovert, very driven, competitive, just has a certain, shows this certain confidence and drive and strategy all the time. But that's just that doesn't mean you're any better a fundraiser. It just means that's who you are.
Yeah.
Everyone, So I think, yeah. So I would agree with that.
Okay, and I'm going to say I'm guilty. I'm a slideaholic. We have a lot of slides, and so I'm going to begin before we go to our Q&A, but I do want to get to two important guests in the community. We've set 3 learning objectives, and that's what board members should do, what they shouldn't do, and Brian is also an expert on chemistry and rapport and team building. But we wanted to ask 2 members of our learning community, and I think she's lying because I haven't seen her from about 15 years and she looks younger. Uh, Phyllis Hill, is it Ajwan? I always get nervous though. What's the right pronunciation?
Arjuan.
Ajwan. Phyllis has excelled in so many different arenas. She served in higher education. She just climbed the ladder in the corporate sector. And then thank you, Phyllis, for the role you played in philanthropy. And take a second, can you talk about the foundation that you formed in memory of your late son?
Thank you so much, Jim. Yes, mine is one of those labors of love and what I call a tough journey. We founded the Erenard Foundation for Sickle Cell Research and Education, and it was founded in memory and in honor of our son, Aaron Ardoin, who lost his life to sickle cell disease at the age of 23 years old. So we are a fundraising and grant making organization because sickle cell continues to be one of the most underfunded areas that are and under-resourced that are in great need. There are some exciting things happening on that front right now, but we seek to, for advocacy, to raise awareness, to enhance the level of treatment, to promote prevention, and to ultimately advance the cure. And there are some strides being made in that area. Thank you for that opportunity.
Okay, now tell us, what would you like to know about stronger boards at 5 o'clock that you don't know now?
Everything.
Boy, isn't she easy to satisfy? Okay, well.
I tell you, I come to this in my best listening mode and prepared to be the most absorbent sponge that I can possibly be, and I know that I am in good company. I have to confess, and I tell people all the time, I confess to being woefully inadequate, probably very underprepared, extremely uncomfortable at fundraising. And I do this because it absolutely needs to be done. And I pray that there would be adequate other people doing it, that I could just bow out. I am serious about that. So Brian, I need this so much. I come to this knowing and recognizing that boards are absolutely high potential teams, not just high potential teams, very actualized teams. But I would like to have better ways and better strategies of making them more high performing, particularly in the area of fundraising. And I am intrigued about your or the connection that you see between what you describe as camaraderie as a board dynamic, and particularly asking styles and authenticity, and really just more effective ways of harnessing the untapped potential of board members, because I know for a fact that they come ready to serve and they want to give. And I know as a board member myself in other capacities, I give where I think I'm good. Yeah. And where I'm comfortable being competent.
You've come to the right place, and I quickly want to call on Jason Longoria as Director at Advancement at Central Catholic High School, and which I like to say Central Catholic High School alumni run San Antonio. They have for the 40 years I've been here. Jason, can you just tell us 30-second about the great tradition of Central Catholic, and then what you would like to know about stronger boards at 5 that you don't know now?
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for having me. And Central Catholic's been around since 1852. It's partnered up with St. Mary's University until about 1932, and they split. The college became the university, or St. Mary's College, now university, over there on Culebra. And Central Catholic started out here at in 1932 in St. Mary's Street. And so with that, we have close to 9,000 living alumni scattered throughout the world. And our educational model is based on the Marianist ideals, Marianist Catholic ideals, an entire religious order formed on the basis of education as a connection to God and a connection to their community as well. So the entire community here at Central Catholic has just been amazing. I'm a graduate myself, and just proud to have come back after 14 years of corporate experience with AT&T and their leadership development program.
You and Priscilla share that, except Priscilla SBC. That's, telecommunications runs this town.
Absolutely.
What would you like to know about stronger boards at 5 that you don't know now?
I think the biggest thing that I'd like to really know is exactly a lot what Phyllis was saying was how do we encourage and empower our board members to see themselves as a connector, as a bridge for us. A lot of the times we can only reach so far, but we rely on the board members to help us reach further and further, like that game of telephone, to get the message out further and further without diluting our message or confusing it. So just really asking our board members how to communicate back down to us to let us know and help us be a bridge to other people in the community. I think sometimes a lot of these board members think, oh, I'm just here because I have a lot of experience or I've given, but it's a lot of their connections and a lot of the other knowledge that they have that is very beneficial.
Well, we're going to move into that, and I'm jumping a few slides here, but I want to emphasize, Brian, that philanthropy, should feel good. Number one, by nothing is close second. The number one predictor of philanthropy is the stock market. It had a down for the last 2 days, but of course we're at historic levels. Brian, I was amazed. I just saw Fidelity Charitable release their donor revised fund totals for 2020, 9.1 billion. They are the biggest grant maker on the planet. That's a 24% increase over from the last year. And most people don't realize 63% of all that 9.1 billion was given unrestricted. I love unrestricted. And finally, too, we like to say there's a Wonder Woman now in philanthropy, Mackenzie Scott. People are giving a lot of money. I don't think we've ever seen it given that quickly, that strategically. And did you know all that money, that $6 billion, was all unrestricted?
Yeah.
It was all given lump sum. She really focused on underserved communities and is going to change philanthropy in a big way. We're going to talk a little bit. The other good news, when Brian and I were taught this 20 years ago, it was all about face-to-face. Face-to-face interaction follows dollars raised, okay? You always wanted to get the meeting. Sometimes it wasn't easy to get the meeting, but we have learned that whoever taught us were wrong, that a lot of money is being raised virtually. There are 1.5 million nonprofits in the country. 100,000 reside in Texas. 6,000, Brian, reside in San Antonio. And it's tough because if you're a donor, you're not choosing between the good and the bad. You're choosing between the good and the good. And you have to find a way to make your nonprofit stand out. And I try to simplify things. Our job is to get the donor to know, like, and trust us. Most nonprofits, and Brian, I know you've had a lot of experience working with the smaller nonprofits, and 88% of nonprofits have annual budgets of $500,000 or less. We like to talk about fundraising in 4 distinct cycles. Who are you going to ask, and why do you think they would be a good prospect? How do you forge a personal and emotional bond between the prospect and your mission? The who, what, where of asking, and the stewardship, which is acknowledging and thanking them. Because if we go to Priscilla, get a gift in 2020, we're going to go back in 2021, and through stewardship, we plan to ask again and for more. But talking, I know you have the 4 asking styles. We're talking about introverts. They might be a little hesitant about the solicitation, Brian. I want you to expand here, but there's plenty of essential work. That's only one piece of the pie that they can do in identifying prospects, building relationships, authentic relationships, and saying thank you. And I'll turn you on a little there, Brian, before we go to the Q&A.
Sure. Well, so talking about board members and their roles and introverts, extroverts, I start by saying that, well, virtually no one likes asking for money. Most people are
Really?
uncomfortable asking for
Do
money.
you like asking for money? Did Jerry like asking for money?
No, he liked helping causes.
Yeah.
I mean, most of us do this work because we care, whether we're professionals or volunteers, right? That's our board members. The only reason any of us do it is because we want to bring resources to the organizations we think are making an impact. So whether we're professional or volunteer, we're more similar than not. Truly, I mean, I've been in thousands of meetings. I've closed tons of gifts. I never wanted to close any of them or do that work. Virtually no one grows up saying, I want to be a fundraiser.
Yeah.
Right? We all have a story of how we got into this, whether it's Phyllis or someone else talking about, their journey through the corporate world or through teaching to it, or going into a nonprofit because you care about the cause and it turns out that's what you're good at doing. In particular, this individual gift work and having to ask one-on-one. And I don't expect every board member to do it. Most board members will say, I'll do anything but fundraise. I hate fundraising. I'm not a fundraiser.
How many times have we heard that?
Right. Every board member says it. And the problem, and this is when we talk about how do we get board members to do more work, the number one thing is to stop forcing them to step on their relationships. It's terrible transactional short-term fundraising. And my number one wish for the entire nonprofit world, and I've been writing about this for a decade now, is for board members to stop that awful quid pro quo. They give $1,000 to their friend and they ask their friend for $1,000. The organization says, give us your list, and they have to send out 50 year-end letters, and they're getting $25 and $50 and $100 gifts, and some of their friends aren't giving anything, and then they think this one's cheap and that one's cheap, and that one should be giving more than I'm giving because they have more money than I do anyway, and it goes around and around. And all it does is cause friction. It's short-term gain, long-term loss. The board member also will say, oh, I solicited my friend Brian, but please don't bother him during the year. I'll go back to him next year. Yeah. So what happens? The gifts the board member solicits, 9 times out of 10, those donors don't develop a relationship with the organization. And when the board member leaves the board, those gifts leave with the board member. And whoever comes on to replace the board member, and if any of you have term limits, you're cycling through your boards, the next board member is simply trying to replace the gifts the previous board member raised.
It sounds like a zero-sum game.
It is. It's worse than a zero-sum game in my mind, because you also have the staff who have to get all these names right, send all the right letters. How many times has a board member said over the years, oh, my friend got it, the letter and her name was spelled wrong, or you left the amount out, or blah, blah, blah. And I think we're shooting ourselves in the foot, and we're using our board members the wrong way. And if we want our boards to be stronger and we want them to be partners in fundraising, we have to change the paradigm. We need them. As you just pointed out, Jim, 88% of all nonprofits have a budget less than $500,000 a year, 92% less than $1 million, whatever those numbers were. most of us don't have major gift officers. Most organizations don't even have one full-time development officer. How are we supposed to do all the individual work? I look at board members, I'd like board members to be ambassadors, advocates, cultivators, thankers, recognizers. Some might ask in conjunction with me as the director of development or the executive director, but I never I never help an organization with the expectation that everyone will ask for money, because everyone can't do it well, and I don't want them I don't want them having to hit up all their friends and relatives, and I don't want them doing a job they would do poorly, and not everyone will do it well.
Yeah.
So the
By the
number
way,
one thing is changing that paradigm, and as you can tell, I'm passionate about trying to do
and we're
that.
going to get to that. By the way, at this point, we have a little tradition here. We like to say that the nonprofit sector is strong, nonprofit strong. So will everybody type in their chat space, nonprofit strong? And by the way, Brian, I'm going to ask you, what are we?
We are nonprofit strong.
You are nonprofit, right? And before we go any further, I've waited a record time before introducing our producer, Michael Largent from Game Day Media. Michael, can you take a second how people can either type questions into the chat space, or better yet, raise their hand, and we want to see their lovely face and we'll bring them on camera.
Sure. So if you guys have any questions while the webinar is going on, you can either, there's a Q&A box. It's actually separate from the chat window, so make sure you click Q&A. You can type your question there, or if you want, you can raise your hand, and then I'll drag you into the call later on, and then you can actually turn on your microphone or your camera or both, and then ask the question directly to Jim and Brian.
I'll tell you what, I have 3 pages to introduce Brian. I'm going to cut it to about 2 lines. First of all, just
Good.
about his whole life has been devoted to the study and the teaching of the art of solicitation. I don't have the year. He formed the company Asking Matters and introduced a wonderful concept that we're going to go through called Asking Styles. What year was that?
We launched in 2010. It's 11 years now.
Okay. And he just authored his 2nd book, Boards and Asking Styles. And I didn't know, in a perfect world, when do you think people will be able to buy book number 3?
September.
Okay, that's a perfect world.
No, it's going to happen.
Oh, okay, you sound there. Hey, Brian, we're again, no easy questions, okay? Can you tell us, in your mind, because I take big subjects and just try to simplify them to this little fish. What's the major difference between a strong and a weak nonprofit board of directors?
What's the number one difference? Wow. A strong board works as a team, where everyone, and a strong team is one where everyone knows their role,
Yeah.
right? Where everyone respects everyone else's role. So,
Yeah.
A peer of mine who's been one of my swamis over the years, Michael Davidson, would say, board members can't do their jobs if they don't know what they are, and they won't do their jobs if everyone else isn't doing their jobs.
Mm.
Right? And I think it's true, especially since this is a volunteer commitment, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
They're paying for the pleasure of doing more work and so forth. The least we can do, the least they should expect, and the least that would motivate them is this sense of teamwork and camaraderie, that they're in it together. And some of that has to be taught and trained.
You led in beautifully to our next question. We're talking about taught and trained. What are your recommendations on an effective or board orientation process? And we'll make it a little tougher. How do you do that virtually?
Well, it is tougher virtually. I'm amazed and impressed. I'm impressed by organizations that have brought on new board members this year, and I know of many that have in this virtual world. I mean, never having had a sit down to or never a visit to the program or whatever. Um, well, I would step back from board orientation because I think the first place where the people are challenged is in presenting the board assignment accurately to board candidates and not being wishy-washy on what's expected. Right? The worst thing, and it happens.
Right on.
I'm sorry.
Right on.
Yeah, the worst thing is to bring board members on. I know it's hard to find board members, and so it's not like we have tons of choices. And by the way, except for one major gig where I work for my alma mater, I've always worked for small organizations. So I always worked for organizations that had to work really hard to find board members, not the big glamorous ones that people were clamoring to get on, right? So. So there, I know what it feels like to not have a lot of options and feel I need more board members. I need more board members. Okay, this person's saying I can do this, but not that. That's okay. I'll take this board member, or this board member's on 4 other boards. Okay, well, I'll take this board member knowing this person may not have a lot of time for us. Hard to say no, but we do ourselves a disservice by lowering the bar and not being strong about our needs. And so that in a sense it starts with a really strong board description, a job description or a job prospectus that candidates see before they go down the path. It's like dating apps, you know.
Right.
I mean, you can put 2 words in about your profile, and then no one knows you until you have your first date, or you can put a lot of information out there so people choose you knowing something. And I think that's important in matching board members to organizations. Once you get past that and you bring people on, or the orientation is on a number of levels. Conversations with the executive director or CEO, visits to the program. A buddy on the board is really helpful so that new board members don't get lost and you can check in and make sure that they feel engaged, that they get an assignment right away, something, a committee so they can jump right in. And I think that, to your question, Jim, is even more important in the virtual world because it's easy to feel removed with all of this virtual stuff. A lot of us are challenged by that, so we really need to keep engaging these new board members we've brought on virtually.
Brian, you're a good person for this next question. I believe you served as an executive director twice in your career.
Yes.
How about you? It gave me my gray. But anyways, the question is, and now you've done so much work advising and building boards. How would you describe an optimum working relationship between the executive director and board chair?
Oh, well, they must be a team. They must be a team with mutual respect. They should be meeting regularly. That's another thing. Being a board chair takes a lot of time. You want a board chair who can give the time, because without the time, it's really hard. And part of that time is ongoing conversations with the executive director. So there's this mutual trust and understanding, and because both are in what are considered lonely positions, where you don't have a peer per se. If you're the chair or you're the executive director, when you're the chair, everyone is, if you will, reporting to you. And if you're in the executive director, either everyone's reporting to you as in staff, or you're reporting to a bunch of people as in the board. And if you and your board chair don't have an alliance, it's even lonelier. So and I think that comes like any relationship, and I always come back to relationship because so much of what we do is about that. is based on spending time together and understanding each other, being very honest with each other. And there has to be that mutual understanding,
Right,
and that's challenging
right.
because the executive director reports to the board.
And
So
I tell you what, you just lead perfectly in the next question. I know too, I have gray hair from my executive director days, and that's for management, staff, and boards all to respect their boundaries and separate spaces. How does that work out?
well, how does that work out? Well, part of it's challenging. Um, the first word that comes to mind is micromanaging, and getting
Yeah,
away from that. That is a problem with some boards, and once a board's in the weeds, it's done for. It's the wrong place, and that's as much. And there are a number of people who need to be the gatekeepers on that, if you will. The number one being the chair of the board, who
absolutely.
needs to keep the conversation at the right level. And that and there are many ways to do that. One way is through consent agendas, and we're getting into the weeds a little bit, but I'm a big believer in those. And for those of you who don't know, a consent agenda is where committees all do their work in advance and submit written reports in advance. And at the beginning of the meeting, those reports are accepted into the minutes, and then with questions. But um, you don't have all the committee chairs getting up and presenting everything that happened at every committee meeting, because then you're inviting board members to comment on what happened in the meetings, and you need and the board members, gets back to that idea of camaraderie and teamwork and mutual respect. You want board members to respect what each other is doing in their committee work. So the work has to happen in committee with a consent agenda, and the board meetings need to uh, be at a high level in terms of discussion and presentation. That helps an awful lot. Also, I mean, no one, no board member should be dealing directly with staff other than the executive director.
Hey, repeat that for the audience.
No, no. Well, there was going to be a caveat, but board members should not be communicating directly with staff unless they're working on something together. They shouldn't be giving staff general program staff feedback and ideas or anything like that. If there's a committee and a staff member is on that committee, such as the CFO or director of finance is on the finance committee, or the heads of programs are on the program committee, or you have, maybe if you have a director of marketing communications or whatever, that person's on a PR and marketing committee, that's fine. But you can't have board members dealing individually with staff and trying to give direction outside of that context. So very important to respect those boundaries, and then you have to have a strong review process for the executive director, where the executive team or the chair and a small group of people are reviewing the executive director every year, and through the executive director, really the management and the efficacy of all the staff.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, we're going to go to the audience in one moment, but I had to work in a biggie question for you. What is your best thinking on a nonprofit achieving 100% annual giving participation from its board?
What
What is your best thinking on achieving
best
100%?
thinking?
Yeah.
So it's funny, after all these years, I really do have some very strong opinions on this, on what is best practice. And one of them is that, well, the job description has to be specific so that when people join your board, they know already what the expectation is. I believe that best practice is to give and get to the best of your ability. Everyone should do both.
And that can really vary per board member, right?
Yes, and it's going to. And I don't believe in minimums because they need to be set low. You still have people who you say to, oh, I know you're on the board because you're a community member. We don't expect you to meet that, which is awful. People look at it
Right
as
on.
dues. Too many people will give
Yeah.
at that only at that level unless you ask for more. And once you are asking board members individually for something personally significant, why do you need it anyway? I don't believe in give or get because it's much easier for the people who can give more to get more because people generally socialize. And I want to get away from that idea anyway because give and get means implies that the board members are going after their own circle, which may not be the right direction for them. It might be better if they spend time helping you with the institution's individual prospects, since you don't have a major gift officer anyway. And I'd rather see my board members as mini major gift officers. So I believe you set a give and get to the best of your ability, and I believe you sit down and you solicit each board member individually for their gift each year, just as you do every major gift donor. Board members tend to be among our best donors. They're the most committed to the organization, and why we don't solicit them when we go out to try and solicit everyone else.
And I love the way you said that's going to be individually and privately, as
Yes.
opposed to something at the end of the meetings about the
No
worst
way.
way you can do it. The worst.
No, and I know why people do it because it can be uncomfortable. But I can also tell you from having done this work, from having sometimes gone with my board president to solicit each person individually as either the ED or director of development, that the conversations are really rich and respectful, and they help board members understand how important all of this is. And how do you expect board members to go out and do the right thing in terms of cultivation and solicitation, such if we don't model it with them?
Right. I'll tell you what, we have I have a lot more questions, but I'd like to get members of our learning community in.
Sure.
Michael, I see 2 up there. Do folks want to type it in, or do they want to come on camera and get the same honorarium that Brian's getting?
So it looks like they just typed in their questions. We've got
We'll take
2
them.
right now.
We'll take them.
Okay.
All right, so the first one, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, Madhu, I'm not sure how to say that. When do you think is the best time to hire part-time / full-time ED for a very small organization that is just starting out?
Wow.
Hey, well, I want to explain. Brian and I have a deal. If
Yeah.
the question is ridiculously easy, I take it. If there's some challenge to it, he takes it. Brian, this one's yours.
Ha ha ha. Madhu, that is I don't know that I know how to answer that question fairly in a minute or two for you, honestly. It depends on so many factors. One of them, I would say, is you only want to grow staff-wise to the extent that you know you can sustain it, right? So my first question would be, can you see for the next, for at least 3 years being able to sustain that, right? Do you have a steady enough income stream to do this? If not, you could be better off with someone who's considered more of an interim part-time. Hard to say. Second, so that would be one parameter. Making this transition is one of the hardest for an organization. From a fully, I'm assuming you've got a fully volunteer-driven organization, right? And that the this part-time executive director would be the first staff person. I might be wrong, but often that's what happens, right? You have, and making that leap sometimes has to happen because you are beyond what the board can do. The board's getting burnt out. Boards have an evolution, and they always follow the organization's growth. So the organization grows and the board catches up, right? So first you have, and this is the first inflection point, Madhu, where you have this board, everyone's come together maybe to support the founder, and it's all hands on deck. We're going to do whatever you need. We'll lick envelopes. We'll get all the silent auction items. We'll do this. We'll do that. We'll be in the office a few hours a week. And then the organization grows to the point where it needs some people who are expert. It needs more consistency. Board members are getting burned out, perhaps. You need to raise more money, and the board can only do so much. And you need to try and make this leap, and at the same time, then get the board to pull back a little bit and move more towards governance than management and hands-on. And it's a tough point.
Yeah.
You know, if
Yeah.
you're finding you've got success with fundraising and you think there's more success to be had, that could be a reason to hire an executive director. But I want to say, having just talked for a few minutes, I wouldn't consider this my area of expertise. So I don't know that I want to say more on it beyond that. And sooner maybe we could think of someone we know who has more experience moving organizations along that way. That's not in my wheelhouse. Jim,
Okay.
would you add something to that then?
I'm going to say the move to the next question.
Okay.
But Michael, would that person just want to type it in, or would like
I'm
to come
seeing
up
them
with it?
actually, Jim. I opened the Q&A. I could.
Okay.
I see Beth's question. What do you think about bringing a new board member on who doesn't have a history of giving to the
And
organization?
by the way, I think I know that, Beth. Would she like to come on camera? Michael, can we give her? She's again one of the fundraising lions of San Antonio. Is that Beth's last name K?
Yeah, so let's if she raises her hand on the if Beth, if you want to come on camera, go ahead and raise your hand. Oh, there she is. So I'm gonna bring her in.
Oh, good.
She's been, by the way, our AFP chapter selected her as the fundraiser of the year in the recent.
Oh, wow. Great.
She and I, only problem, Beth, we hadn't had lunch. We used to always have lunch once a month, and it's been not that long. But Beth's nice to see you, and thank you for being part of our learning community. And Beth really has contributed. She's mentored so many fundraisers in this community. So Beth,
Thank you.
please go ahead.
And Brian, I'm at Jewish Federation, and one of my roles is life and legacy. So
Ah,
listen to you quite often. So
Oh,
my
great.
question, but I'm also responsible for annual campaign and the Federation model, which you're
mm, mm.
familiar with.
Yeah,
So,
very.
I appreciate you talking about the one-on-one solicitation for the board member. This past year, I did at least had our board member do a personalized letter, which they had never done before, but he would not include an amount of an ask.
Mm.
Oh, drives me crazy.
Yeah.
So it precipitated my question of one member in particular, because they didn't do that, gave $100.
Mm.
But because he had no history of giving with our organization, it was brought in, I don't think, with any discussion or expectation. So again, that's part of sometimes, not that we were desperate for a board member, but he did bring with him an expertise of investment and business acumen. So what's that balance, I guess, is
Yeah.
what I'm
Yes.
asking of you. Because we don't do give and get per se, although on the Federation model, everybody's supposed to solicit, but
Yeah.
it's hard to have a board member who's only giving $100
Yeah.
make that ask.
Yeah. So people say, well, if we don't have a minimum gift, how do people know how much to give?
Right.
And I say that you tell people what the range is. When they're interviewing for the board, they're going to ask, if you don't say, well, what are the expectations? And I would say, well, we ask everyone to make a personally significant gift. And I know most of you have now heard that expression probably. Personally significant gift. We'd like it to be one of the top gifts you give to an organization since you're sitting on our board. We'd like it to be a gift you have to think about. And our board members are now giving a range of anywhere from $1,000 to $25,000 because it depends on their capacity.
Okay.
It depends a little bit on their experience and how long they've been with us. But we ask everyone to do their best to
Mhm.
really think about what's meaningful to them.
Okay.
And we will then solicit you in the future, and have that discussion. So I try to, and I will put some of that even in a job prospectus
Okay.
if necessary. So once someone's given $100 as a first gift, assuming you know that that person can give significantly more, um, I someone needs to bite the bullet and have that conversation
Mhm.
and say we appreciate that first gift and we may not have been clear to start. That's on us, but we want our board to feel it's in this together. And if everyone's doing their best, it will feel good. So we'd like to ask you to do your best. And we don't, of course, know what
Right, with
is
that.
best for you, but would you consider an annual fund gift of $2,500 or $5,000 or whatever? So and I know it's so much easier for me to use make these phrases while you and I are having a conversation than it is in one of these meetings. It's often difficult to have that conversation, but we need to do the best for our organization, and we are on the same side, right? So whoever we're talking to should be on our side and appreciate, even if it's a little awkward, that it's an important conversation to have. And you can even say that. I've had conversations where I've started by saying, I know this can be awkward, but it's so important, and I appreciate your sitting down with me and listening to what we have to say. Now, if a board member says, I totally didn't get that, and I really don't want to do that. And this is someone with a lot of capacity who's only making this little gift. That's problematic for your board. And you need to decide whether that was just a mistake because other board members will, it will sap their enthusiasm.
And Brian, you know what really kind of consumed me? The solicitation of that board member is their first lesson in how to fundraise others.
Yes.
And
Right.
so if you do it beautifully, guess what? They're going to be off to a great start. If
Right.
you say you don't suggest an amount and all that,
Right, because you have to ask for an exact amount. That's one of the most important, to me,
Right.
one of the most important rules, and we could spend a lot of time on why that's key.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It was not a lesson learned on my part, other than it was our president, board chair, and that's what he was comfortable with.
Right.
And I had to do that, and it did come to bite us back. But what I'd really like to do is, and we did the same thing with former board. We did that for the very first time. I don't know how you feel about engaging former board, but I'm a real proponent of reaching back to former board from our past. I use a past president to do that, and he was not afraid to ask.
That's great.
from
So
your lips, that's a great, that from your lips to God's ears.
Yeah.
Brian, we're at 7 minutes here, and we're
Okay.
going
Wow, it's gone fast.
we're going to do a hurry up offense. This has been a very rich discussion, but I'm glad this slides up here because you and Andrea introduced to the world asking styles.
Mhm.
I am going to give you 2 of the 7 minutes we have left to kind of describe, now that people see it on the screen,
Sure.
describe each of the squares.
Sure. So the styles are based on 2 characteristics: how one acts, extroverted, introverted, and how one thinks, analytic, intuitive. And no one fits cleanly in one box. As a matter of fact, on my website, and I know some of you have probably taken the assessment, there's a 30-question true-false assessment. It's free. Anyone can take it, and it'll give you a primary and a secondary. The rainmaker, the analytic extrovert, is the type of person everyone thinks of. Fact-based, strategic, driven, competitive, keeps their eye on the prize, looking in the future, measures success very concretely in terms of numbers and such. The go-getter, the intuitive extrovert, top right, is the one who makes friends easily, has lots of passion, vision, enthusiasm, is looking in the future, but much more broadly at the opportunity. The kindred spirit, the intuitive introvert, is the feelings oriented person who's very caring and selfless towards others, wants people to be heard, feel included, feel important. Key skills for fundraising, very different core skills from the rainmakers. All of these are important skills, and we all have bigger or smaller portions of them. And then the mission controller, the analytic introvert, bottom left, the Eagle Scout who always keeps their eye on the prize. Very methodical, systematic, planful, always gets the job done, and in fact, often the best listener in the group, loves to sit back and observe. So each has core qualities. You can see how one of the things I talk about often in both books and in all my training is partnering, right? What if two of you are going out and one of you is a go-getter and one of you is a mission controller? How do you work together? What are the skills you bring to the table? And these asking styles, I encourage boards to take the assessment and then to discuss the results, because it helps, going back to the very beginning, Jim,
Yeah,
it helps board members appreciate each other more. So instead of being annoyed with the board member who always, does this reality check, but is it possible? Or being annoyed by the board member who constantly throws out a new idea, or being a board chair who's frustrated that a few people don't talk in the meeting. Well, heck, they're introverts. You got to, appreciate that they have opinions and you want to get them some other way. We once we know each other's style, we appreciate each other more, and that helps build this teamwork and a sense
right.
of camaraderie.
And you make
That's
the
my 2
point,
minutes.
okay, and you make the point that no matter what your asking style is, that any of those four squares can help build relationships,
Absolutely.
which is the number one input for getting gift income.
Absolutely. All four, no style is necessarily more or less effective than the other. Everyone has strengths, no one has it all. And let's not forget, all our donors have a style, right? So not everyone's going to like the person who's
Do
more
you
assertive,
do you
right?
suggest some organizations can get as strategic as matching asking styles of the donor and the solicitor?
Maybe. I mean, you could somewhat, but there's so many other factors like hierarchy and relationship, or maybe even just who's available because you only have one person. So as much as anything, unless you're in a really big shop, and I rarely talk to those people because they have tons of professionals, I say use them as a map once you know what you're doing. So, and people will then say, well, how do I figure out the style of my donor? You can get a sense from the questions they've asked before by whether they say, yeah, I'll just have a short meeting, whether they don't want to be on camera at all in our video world. That could be a mission controller, kindred spirit. So you might have a sense and you might say, well, gee, look, I'm a rainmaker and I'm going to see a kindred spirit. What should I think about? Like maybe I need to tone it down a little bit. Maybe I'll need to be, more careful about making sure I leave time for that kindred spirit donor to talk. Things like that. So I would use these to help you figure out how to lay out the meeting
Yeah,
and be sensitive to the donor as much as anything.
and the key thing is that everyone but needs to play a role in that board.
Everyone.
The fact that they have different personalities can make that a great team, right?
Yes. You know what? I often the fundraising is left to the development committee for some reason. I don't know why. To me, the development committee is overseeing the fundraising, making sure it moves ahead strategically. But I said, why? Why? This is the hardest work a board is asked to do, in my estimation. And why should only a few of the board members be doing it? Everyone should be in it together.
Yeah. And by the way, we're now down to about 2 minutes, but I like the emphasis that you put on board assessment and evaluation. Can you take a whole minute to talk a little about that?
Yes. I think every board should go through, every board member, there should be review processes at multiple levels every year. I mean, the board needs to be meeting, hopefully in person, having some sort of retreat every year and analyzing the organization, analyzing themselves as a board, right? How has our board operated on the whole and what should we do? And then individually, how has each of us operated and what can we do better last year? And that happens through, again, this one-on-one process. So I believe the first step would be sitting down individually to solicit board members. But once you're doing that, to have a fuller conversation about everything the board member brought to the table last year, to acknowledge it and thank the board member and hope the board member feels appreciated and valued and valuable. And then to talk about the coming year and what the board member would like to see, just like any job review.
Right.
Board members will benefit from that.
Hey, let's go back to where you started with the great Gerald Panis, and let's repeat one last time. If the people take nothing away from this, what did Jury teach us?
That you can't listen yourself out of a gift. No one's ever listened themselves out of a gift. I think that's how it goes. Listen, listen, listen.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll add one of my own. My motto is ask short questions and hope for long answers.
You know, can I steal that? I like that.
Sure, you can steal it.
Okay.
Ask short questions, hope for long answers. If you get a short answer, ask another short question.
And what you're saying too, the fact that we have many different backgrounds and skills and personalities, that's great for a board.
Yes.
Because if everybody was the same,
right.
What's the big deal?
People tell me, oh, everyone on my board is X or Y or whatever, and then you're missing something. You're missing either the strategy or the vision or the heart or the plan. You need these different voices and perspectives. Absolutely. Makes for the strongest team.
I'll ask you a tough question. Who's the only person in the history of the planet that both read a poem at the inauguration and read a poem at the Super Bowl?
Ah, here she is.
Right here. I mean, and Brian, I love the name of her poem is Climb the Hill. Mm-hmm. And I think of the nonprofit sector, that's what we always do. And when I think of the nonprofit sector and the citizens of the world right now, folks, we have to climb this hill together. But guess what? We can climb this hill. And I want to thank all our audience of learning community members, their staff, their executive directors, their CEOs, their directors of development, their board chairs and board members and volunteers and donors. And I want to close, Brian, you give a guarantee, I give a guarantee. Your chances of getting the gift go way up when you ask.
Absolutely.
Right. This has been such a rich hour. We just didn't have enough time.
Oh.
But Brian, thank you. I've been following for a long time. This has been a professional and personal highlight to partner with you in a webinar. I better warn you, I want to do it again. Okay. So thank you so much. This was a rich hour. Thank you to our learning partners. We're going to post a summary on LinkedIn and Facebook of about, it's only 1,300 character spaces. And then Michael is going to do the magic spin cycle, and we'll have a recording of the tape and slides. Michael, what do you say, about an hour or so from now?
Yeah, it should be about an hour.
Okay, well, listen,